Man, it's really been about 10 years since the Last of Us game dropped. Naughty Dog really made a landmark title with this one. Ever since Uncharted, they've been known for making cinematic movie-like games, with cutscenes that can come straight out of an action movie. With The Last of Us, it showcased the very best of that style of game storytelling for its time, and it still holds up today. We know this from the various remasters and re-releases that this game got, but also from the recent live-action TV series that's airing on HBO right now. Well, by the time this video comes out, it'll probably be over. The series starring Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey pretty much sticks close to how the story was told in the game, with the series hitting just about the same story beats. But the series also does something really cool and adds to the original story in many incredibly impactful ways. That's what I want to focus on in this video. About these added scenes and characters that give way more context to the story of the original game, enhancing what was already there. The series really takes advantage of its format, giving us the audience more insights into the world of The Last of Us and the various characters and factions that make it up. So today, my dear viewers, let's talk about how HBO's Last of Us makes the game even better. Before we continue into the video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and also follow me on Twitter for the latest updates on the channel. Alright then, now back to the video. One of the things that Neil Druckmann, the creator of the original Last of Us game, said about the game was that it was specifically made so that we only follow the perspectives of Joel and Ellie only. Even in all of the cutscenes in the game, Joel and Ellie are always in them. So when it came time to adapt this story for live action, they could have done the same approach and would have had similar results. But instead, the showrunners Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann chose to expand on other characters that we only got to see a slight glimpse of in the game. One example of this would be in the first episode with Sarah. In comparison to the game, Sarah has a lot more screen time in the show. We get to see a lot more scenes of her with her dad Joel. We get to see a lot more of her personality as she interacts with other characters like her Uncle Tommy or her neighbors the Adlers. Seeing the beginnings of the story through her eyes was a great change of pace as compared to the game, where things just start off running. It also makes her death even more tragic for audiences who have never even played the game, as you can get attached to her character from all those extra scenes. After the time skip of 20 years, you also get to see a lot more context as to what was going on behind the scenes in the game, what they finally put on screen. From smaller things like seeing exactly what Joel smuggles into the quarantine zones, which is usually drugs, hardcore drugs, to bigger events like how Tess got caught up with Robert's men and beat her up, and also how she got interrogated by Fedra, the fascist military dictatorship that has been in control of the quarantine zones. Originally, Tess just told Joel what happened and then they went to find Robert. We also get to see what Ellie was doing with Marlene before Joel and Tess show up. We see that she was being tested to see if she was infected, but as we know, she is immune. This scene also gives the audience some early insight into Ellie's personality, which I thought was a really good touch to introduce her character. And also, I gotta say that the casting of this show is brilliant. Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey are phenomenal as Joel and Ellie, and every other actor fits their character perfectly. More on this a bit later. But anyways, the rest of the episode pretty much played out like the game, except for a scene that gives us so much more context for Joel as a character in the show, which is when the Federal Guard has Joel, Tess, and Ellie held up, and Joel has a flashback to when he and Sarah were held up by a soldier, and Joel loses it and beats the guard to death. I thought this scene was great because it added a greater depth to Joel's character that we didn't get to see a lot of in the game. More details on that a bit further in the video. The second episode didn't add as much to the story of the original game, aside from a few scenes, like the opening scene where Joel and Tess are seeing if Ellie was going to turn, and the scenes of them going through parts of the city, which were incredibly well done by the way. The set design in this show is second to none. It really feels like these people are walking around in flooded empty buildings and scaling rooftops. The sets add so much to the show, so I just had to mention them. Also, speaking of design, the clickers in this episode were done amazingly well. I believe that the heads weren't CG, I believe that there was prosthetics, and man do those prosthetics look incredible. Very impressive work by the team. Anyways, just like the game, Tess got infected and sacrificed her life so that Joel and Ellie can get away. In the show, it was from infected, but in the game, I believe it was from the military, and you still had to fight some of them to get out of the building. And also, what the fuck was up with that infected kiss? Weird, yet... nah, it was just weird. I don't really get the point of it, but you know, the scene was still done amazingly well regardless. Episode 3 has the most changes from the game to the show than I think any other part of the game. That mainly has to do with how Bill and Frank were portrayed in the game as opposed to the show. In the game, we go through Bill's booby-trapped town in order to have him give us a car. Upon meeting him, we see that Joel and Bill aren't on the greatest terms, but Bill decides to help out anyways, after finding a car without an engine, Joel, Ellie, and Bill have to fight their way across town through hordes of infected, so that they finally get to the engine in the car and get the car started. Upon finding the engine and fixing up the car, however, we see the hanging body of Frank, who was Bill's partner who had since left him. They fix the car and Joel and Ellie are on their merry way. None of this shit happens in the show. Like, at all. But instead, what we got was one of the most beautifully told and emotionally impactful love stories that I've ever seen in a long time. A long, long time. This episode also gives the audience context for what Bill and Frank's relationship was, and also gave them a sad yet beautifully poetic ending to their story than in the game. In the show, we see that Bill was a doomsday prepper who lived in a bunker underneath his house, while the rest of his neighborhood was evacuated and killed. When everyone left, Bill took over the town by taking equipment and building a fence around his neighborhood with various traps around it so that any raiders or infected won't be able to get in, much like in the game. But one day, 4 years into him taking over this area, a man falls into one of his traps, and Bill reluctantly brings him into his house and feeds him. After having a great meal, they find out they have a mutual love for music, and also a mutual love for each other, if you know what I'm saying. Yes, this is the gay episode, everybody, and it's fucking incredible. From this point, we see the ups and downs of living in this town with Bill. From Bill and Frank arguing about fixing up the neighborhood and having friends, to actually seeing the first time Joel and Tess meet Bill and Frank, to the really heartwarming strawberry scene, to being raided. It's a series of ups and downs, definitely. But through all of that hardship, their relationship still remains strong, which is definitely different from how the relationship was portrayed in the game. But all things must come to an end, and things take a sudden, deeply sad turn when you find out that Frank has cancer, and he wants to have one last day with Bill before Bill puts sleeping pills in his drink to kill him. This ending sequence, along with another scene in the show that I'll get to later, was the closest I've come to crying to a TV show or movie in a long time. A long, long time. The incredible acting from Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett is just icing on the cake to this beautifully written scene. Even though none of this was in the original game, I gotta say I much prefer what they did in the show than what happened in the game. I am so happy that Neil and Craig chose to go this route with such a brilliant episode for a brilliant series. Alright, so episodes 4 and 5 are interesting because they kind of put two plot points from the game into one, and I think it was handled pretty well. The first one being the hunters who were in control of a part of a city, and that leads Joel and Ellie to lose their car, and also Joel and Ellie meeting Henry and Sam. I definitely feel like putting those two plot points together definitely makes a lot more sense for the show than if they kept it the same from the game. But let's get into some of those differences. The hunter group from the game is a lot more fleshed out in the show. In the game, they were pretty inconsequential to the story, outside of making Joel and Ellie lose their car and getting some insight into Joel's past. But here in the show, they were a fully realized militia group that liberated the QZ from Fedra, and then made their own fucked up military dictatorship because post-apocalypse, I guess. This group is headed by Kathleen, who is such a piece of shit and is probably my least favorite part of the series. I just don't think she's as well written of a character as a lot of the other characters. There's supposed to be an element of, well, I understand where she's coming from since Henry got her brother killed, but all that goes out of the window when she does stuff like this and says stuff like this.
But I do. I know why you did what you did. But did you ever stop to think that maybe he was supposed to die?
He's just a fucking kid!
Well, kids die, Henry. They die all the time.
Yeah, just not my favorite character. Anyways, let's get back to Joel and Ellie. How they lose the car is pretty much the same as in the game, but there are a few scenes added that add something to Joel's character that I think is really important. When Ellie shoots the guy to save Joel and he didn't die, and Joel has to finish him off, it just adds to show the ruthlessness of Joel. But we also have the next scene where they're alone after the fact, and Joel has a heart-to-heart with Ellie and gives her the gun. This is one of my favorite scenes in the show because we get to see a more vulnerable side of Joel than we ever got to see in the game at this point. There's a sense of regret and fear that Joel has that I think adds so much to an already well-written character. Moving on to Henry and Sam, we actually get to see what they were up to before they met Joel and Ellie. In the show, it turns out that Henry was a part of the revolutionary militia with Kathleen, but to get medicine for his brother Sam's leukemia, he sold Kathleen's brother out to Fedra and got him killed. All of the scenes with Henry and Sam alone together were just absolutely brilliant. We didn't get to fully see this side of them in the game, so adding all of these quiet moments with them together just trying to survive was a really great choice. And also the actor that plays Sam is just so damn cute and does such a fantastic job considering this is his first role. Speaking of Sam, he also did an interesting thing with him, which is that he is younger in the show, and also that he is deaf. These things add a different dynamic to his relationship with Henry and his relationship with Ellie that I personally think was really smart. Also, the dynamic between Joel and Henry was a bit different as well, especially since we have a more focused reason for them joining forces than it was in the game. In the show, it was more of a we have to work together because we have a common enemy and a goal that was clear, rather than in the game when it wasn't as clear cut. The ending of this sequence was also a bit different, and I also think it makes it a bit more tragic. So after Kathleen and her militia are killed by a horde of infected that they could have stopped earlier if Kathleen wasn't such a shit, Joel, Ellie, Henry, and Sam find an empty motel to sleep in. Joel invites Henry and Sam to join them on their way to Wyoming to find Joel's brother. The key difference in this scene that makes it all the more better was that in the scene with Sam and Ellie, we get to see much more than in the game that Sam looks up to Ellie and admires her strength and fearlessness, even though she is terrified herself all the time. Another thing that they changed, and that I think makes this scene even more tragic, is that Ellie finds out that Sam is bitten before they go to sleep, and in trying to save Sam, she tries to put some of her blood into his bite since she is immune. But it obviously doesn't work. Yeah, this is the other scene in the show that really got me close to crying. Why y'all gotta do this to me, Craig and Neil? It was like, yeah, let's find the cutest kid we can find and kill him for our show. Jesus, that was heartbreaking. And what's even more heartbreaking is that we actually get to see them bury Sam and Henry, rather than just finding their graves in the game. The writing board just saying I'm sorry broke me, man. God, it was such an incredible episode. So episode 6 probably has my favorite scene in the entire show, where Joel has a one-to-one with his brother Tommy. But before we get there, getting to Jackson in the game was a bit different than it was in the show. In the show, we meet this hilarious elderly couple that stays far away from people and infected. You also get to see our first scene with Joel and his panic attacks, which is another change from the game that I really like. We really get more of a vulnerable Joel than we get in the game. It shows us that even though he is a hardened killer, he is still human. This also compiles into the scene where Joel and Ellie are being held up by a couple of people from Jackson. With the infection smelling dog, Joel's anxiety just shoots up and he freezes, not knowing what to do. It is a very intense scene considering how it ends. Joel and Ellie are finally in Jackson, and Joel finds Tommy in one of the most genuinely wholesome moments in the entire show. It just feels so organic and natural, and it really warmed my heart. The next couple of scenes added context to things that we heard from in the game, with the most important one being Ellie's scene alone with Maria, Tommy's wife. In the game, it was just said that Maria told Ellie about what happened to Sarah, but here in the show, we actually get to see it, and it goes a long way to make a later scene hit even harder. Another scene that we have to talk about is when Joel has a heart-to-heart with Tommy, telling him everything that happened since he left Boston. This is what I was talking about when I said that this episode has my favorite scene in the show, because it is so different to how it was in the game. In the show, Joel shows his genuine feelings about what he had to do to survive, and most importantly, about what he feels about himself and his failures. When he talked about his panic attacks, and his fear of not being able to protect Ellie, it truly moved me. My heart broke when he said,
I just know that when I wake up, I've lost something. I'm failing in my sleep. It's all I do. It's all I've ever done. It's failure. Again and again.
You want me to take her?
I'm just gonna get her killed. I know it. I know it.
When he says her, I think he means both Ellie and Sarah. I think that throughout the show, showing the fear that has come over Joel and having all of that pain and hurt spill out as he's talking to Tommy really adds so much to Joel's character than how it was in the game. And I'm truly so happy about how they decided to go this route. It is genuinely my favorite change that they've done for the show. The rest of the episode happens pretty similarly to the game, including the heart-wrenching argument scene between Joel and Ellie. It's the most iconic scene from the game, so they had to nail it for the show, and they absolutely did. Seeing Joel's regret after that scene with them showing flashbacks of him and Sarah was a great touch and was a bit more clear than just his facial expressions than how it was in the game. But as we know, Joel continues his journey with Ellie, leaving Jackson behind for now. After 5 quiet days of bonding over learning about how life used to be, including talks about football and contractors, because if you couldn't tell that Joel is from Texas, be sure as hell know now. We finally get to the university. Joel and Ellie finally get to the firefight hideout, and guess what? There's no one there. It would have been cool if they got the tape recorder that was in the game talking about the chances of the surgery going well and whatnot, but that's fine. This ending part was a bit different though. A bit meaning that an entire battle set piece was essentially cut from the show. While I've been enjoying the approach of focusing more on the drama for the show at this point, I wish they added a little bit more to the fight scene rather than Joel just getting stabbed with a broken bat. But Joel and Ellie escape, and Joel is obviously fucked up, so he falls off his horse and the episode ends. You also get another brilliant performance from Bella Ramsey at this point. Such a great way to cap off the episode. I don't really have much to say about episode 7. I feel like what happened here was essentially just what happened in the game without any big story changes. But I would like to talk about a few scenes that I found really great. First off, once again, hats off to the set design team because man, that mall looks absolutely amazing. I feel like everything in the environment has so much detail just like in the game. So yeah, just wonderful job set designers. Obviously, if you played the DLC of The Last of Us, you will know that by the end of the story that Ellie and Riley have romantic feelings for each other. And I feel like the romantic tension was handled much better in the show than how it was in the game. There were a couple of moments where Ellie is going through big gay panic that I found very cute and relatable. Been there, done that, sister. I get it. All of these small moments of romantic tension lead to even bigger payoff with the kiss than it was in the game. I thought it was a very nice touch. And then obviously we have the heartbreaking conclusion where both Ellie and Riley get bit. I also feel like this scene in the aftermath of it was done even better than it was in the game, with Ellie taking out all of her sadness and anger to the moment where Ellie and Riley just hold each other. And that just broke my little heart into a million little pieces that I now have to sweep off the floor. Thank you, Craig and Neil, I really appreciate it. But in all seriousness, this episode was done incredibly well. And once again have to shout out Bella Ramsey and also Storm Reed for their incredible performances. They really had some great chemistry on screen, and it was truly a delight to watch. Alright, so off rip, episode 8 was fantastic. It did a lot of really cool things in this episode, but the main thing we have to talk about is the one and only David. In the show, David is a pastor who preaches the word of God to his reluctantly supportive group of followers. As the episode goes on, it really seems like they all just hate this dude, but he's such a big part of their lives they just can't escape from him or do anything about it. We see a lot more in the show that David is going through a bit of a power trip, especially when he smacks the shit out of this little girl for speaking out of turn, and then calls himself her father and that he shall not be disrespected when he's speaking. Also, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but they actually made David way creepier in the show than he ever was in the game. The conversation that David has with Ellie when they're in the cabin hit a lot of the same beats as the one that happened in the game, but with this added preacher narrative. But just like in the game, it feels like something just a bit off. Not only because of the reveal that the 4 dudes that attacked Joel and Ellie in episode 6 came from David's group, but also that there's something off with David himself. And we see why that is when they talk again when Ellie is caged up. He talks about having a violent heart and cordyceps showing him the truth. That the cordyceps look out for their own, even through violent means. And then we get to the real reason why David has been keeping her alive for so long. And I gotta say, they did a really good job with this scene because I was creeped out way more here than I was in the game. And that creeped out, uncomfortable feeling stayed and increased with the restaurant scene, where David is stalking around the burning restaurant looking for Ellie. I felt like they did a great job of adapting what it felt like playing this boss fight in the game onto the screen. Especially when it came to the conclusion, David corners Ellie as she tries to reach out for his butcher knife. And yeah, David makes it really clear what he wants to do to Ellie in this scene, which I have to say made me very uncomfortable to watch. Like in the game, it was implied that that's what he wanted to do, but in the show, they just said fuck it, let's make it as clear as day that David is a piece of shit. David then gets his very deserving comeuppance, which went on way longer in the show than it did in the game, and it wasn't until after Ellie left the restaurant where Joel finds her, which added a sense of, oh my god, what did I just do for Ellie? And yeah, when Joel said baby girl to Ellie, it got me good. It got me real good. So yeah, everything else was pretty much adapted straight from the game, like the torture scene with Joel, which was done incredibly well. And I also have to say that Troy Baker, the original voice and mocap for Joel in the game, did a great job as James, David's right-hand man. Overall, very good episode. Okay, on to the season finale, and we're starting off really strong with a flashback that adds context to a line from the game. In the game, Marlene tells Joel that she knew Ellie when she was a baby, and that she promised her mother that she'd take care of her. Well, in the show, we actually get to see that, with a phenomenal scene with Ashley Johnson, the original voice and mocap for Ellie in the game. Ashley is actually playing Ellie's mom as she's giving birth to Ellie and fighting infected at the same time. Ellie's mom, Anna, was such a fucking badass, who as we could guess was a part of the Fireflies with Marlene. This scene was excellent, and was a great way to start off the episode. Most of the rest of the episode was pretty much the same as the game except for a few key moments. The scene where Joel opens up to Ellie and talks about how he almost committed suicide after Sarah died. This scene was great to me because it's still showing that vulnerable side of Joel, and I'm really glad that they added that to the story for the show. Also, how they got to the Fireflies was different. In the game, Joel is saving Ellie from drowning, and then the Fireflies find them and then knock Joel out. In the show, the Fireflies just roll up on Joel and Ellie, flashbangs them, and then knocks Joel out as they're taking Ellie away. Talk about a fucking entrance, like Jesus. Anyways, he wakes up and Marlene is there and is talking about how it's possible that Ellie can make a cure against the cordyceps, but that doing that would have to take the cordyceps that grow in Ellie's brain, and that would kill her. Joel is definitely not having it, and as he is getting walked out of the hospital after he heard the news, he snaps and kills the 2 guards that were with him. What happens next is one of my favorite scenes in the show. I love how they handled this section of gameplay and adapted it. So Joel, one-man army style, just takes out an entire building of Fireflies as he's trying to get to Ellie. But what's different here than what was in the game is that based on how it was shot and the sound design, which was excellent by the way, it seemed that Joel was going through a dissociative moment, not really thinking about what he was doing, just thinking I have to save her. We see this especially when Joel is in the operation room and the lead doctor pulls a scalpel on Joel, and Joel immediately shoots him in the head and starts talking to the nurses, like he wasn't even there. I thought that this was a really cool detail to add to these scenes. How it ends is pretty much the same as in the game too. Joel kills Marlene and takes Ellie back to Jackson where Tommy is. Before they get there, Joel lies to her and said that there were more immune people and that the cure didn't work. And the incredible ending scene where Ellie makes Joel swear to her that everything that he said was true, and he doubles down on his lie and Ellie says,
Okay.
such great writing for a great show. So, that was HBO's The Last of Us. I really quite enjoyed it. Yeah, I wish there were more action scenes and scenes with infected in general, because after episode 5 there's no infected to be seen outside of flashbacks. But overall I must say they actually did it. They finally adapted The Last of Us to live action. For years people have been asking for this, and it finally came true and it was really good. Can't wait to see what they do in season 2. I'm especially curious because, in all honesty, I wasn't a big fan of Last of Us Part 2. I think the story of that game has some big glaring issues that I might talk about in a future video, but I'm curious how it'll hold up in live action. Tune in next time for something completely different. Peace.